This is the day we've all been waiting for. This wonderful summer reading book. All the prep schools in New England, I found out yesterday, we're all jealous that we have Wes Moore here. But to introduce Wes Moore, we have a Taft graduate from '96, Carl Brown, who has many parallel experiences in his life with Wes. But he was just saying this morning how this motto, to serve and not to be served, really shaped his life at Taft, shapes his life now and what he does. But I'm going to turn it over now to Carl Brown. But I just want to say something about the schedule. Following today's morning meeting, if we have if it's a really big group, we'll stay here for Q&A. But if it's not, if it's a more intimate 40-ish, 50, we'll go into the faculty room as we do with guest speakers. And following that, around 12 o'clock, we'll be in East Wing Dining Hall. Wes will be here till about 1, and we can continue, let him eat some lunch, but then we can ask more questions there. But turn it over to Carl Brown.
Wow, it's been a while since I've been up here, and I feel bad for you sitting in that chair right there in the orange. I'm sorry to point you out, but that was my old chair. You get absolutely no sleep in that chair. So, as you heard, I'm Carl Brown. I'm not Wes Moore. I know a couple people might actually, without the introduction, might have been sitting there going, which one is it? They kind of look alike. But no, I got here almost, 20 years ago now. I enrolled here at Taft, graduated, went up to Johns Hopkins where I met Wes. It was the summer of 1998 at the Athletic Center. I don't know if you remember that or not. But it was one of those meetings where you get introduced to somebody and you're like, wow, this guy is going to do big things and I want to be around him. I want to get to know him, and just whatever little bit that he's can give me, I want to have. And what's great is the foundation that I got here at Taft, as we were talking before about the school motto and understanding how important it is to be of service to other people, helped shape who I was. I'm sitting here fortunate enough to see a lot of faculty members that are here that were here when I was here. And I never told it to them when I was here, but they helped shape me into who I am today, because I had the chance at one point in time to be Wes. And what I mean by that is Wes's life and my life mirror one another in many, many ways. In reading Discovering Wes Moore, and I've also read the other book, The Other Wes Moore, I read that book and I sat there and said, this is me. These choices, I had the same choice to make. But fortunately for me, a place like Taft was here and the faculty was here to help shape me into who I am. When I met Wes was, this rising star coming through Hopkins, and all of our mutual friends, we sat there and we looked around and we were sitting there going, wow, how do we do this? And he elevated us because that's who he is. Service is what this man is about, whether it's service of the presidential type, because as you know, he spoke at the Democratic National Convention, or just service in your local community. That's what I hope you guys will recognize in yourself as you sit here and you listen to Wes and hear his story and what he's going to talk to you about. But think about what is going on in your life, but how that impact is being felt by others and how you can make a difference in someone else's life and who you're potentially sitting next to now or you're sitting next to in the future. And with that, I'm going to leave the stage and turn it over to Wes Moore.
Thanks, Joel. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you. What's going on, guys? I'm I am really, really, really humbled and honored to be here. And first, I'd be remiss if I didn't say a little bit about my man Carl. Um, he's not only and when I say smart, like I'm talking like, some people are like smart and some people are like scary smart. Like he's scary smart. Like one of these people who just knows a lot about a lot. And you always sit there and like, whenever he asks you what you think, you don't even want to say nothing because you don't want to look stupid. So, but even more than that, he's just one of the most humble, honest, and helpful people that I've ever had a chance to be around. And there are people who, and when you think about your experiences, whether it be in high school or college, and you think about people who are kind of rocks of the experience, people who really laid the foundation for your experience. For me, Carl's one of those people. So the fact that my man came from Pittsburgh just to come here today says a lot about who he is and about the kind of friend that he is. So thank you very much for being here. And and this is really humbling to be here to Bob and to Mr. Mack and to Gail and the whole team. You're always nervous coming to a place where your book was mandatory reading, because I remember what it was like when I had mandatory reading, and I wasn't always very happy about mandatory reading. So the reception that I've gotten here is very humbling and actually puts me a lot at ease. So I really appreciate that. And this place is pretty amazing, guys. I mean, when I first came on campus and I had a chance to walk around, I'm thinking to myself, I kept on. I was. It's funny, even when I was speaking earlier, I was like, I keep on commenting how beautiful this campus is and how amazing this place is and the history and the places that y'all are going to go afterwards. And this isn't like, well, this is a really nice high school campus. I mean, this is better than most college campuses that I've been to. And it's just the truth. But I say that not simply to say, like, congratulations. Right? But I say that because it means that this experience and the expectations that are placed upon you from this experience now have to mean something. And it has to mean something to more people than just yourselves. Every one of us in this room have been blessed. Every one of us in this room have angels and champions who have fought for us. For some of us, it was family. For some of us, it was parents. For some of us, it was guardians and mentors. And for some of us, they might be people who we've never even met before. But they believed in us. They believed in us in a way that, quite honestly, we might not even yet believe in ourselves. And that has to mean something. I wanted from this story for people to understand that this story is about much more than just these two kids. It's about much more than just one neighborhood or one race or one socioeconomic group or even one generation. But that it's about all of us. It's about the decisions that we make in our lives, and tantamount to that, the people who we have in our lives who help us to make those decisions. And what they mean to not just us, but what they mean to all of us. I was speaking with some students earlier, and they said, I really liked your autobiography. And I'm always interested when I hear it, because I have to be very honest. I don't see this book as an autobiography, nor do I see this book as a biography. We took a class in college with Professor Kagan called Visions of the Self. And this class was cool because what you would do is, for this class, Visions of the Self, 1 week you would read an autobiography. And the next week you would read a biography of that person. And then the third week, you would get together and you would then discuss the differences between the two. Basically, what did a person think of themselves versus what do other people think of them, right? And it was a cool class because the two main takeaways that I took from the class was, one, there's always differences between what a person thinks of themselves and what other people think of them, right? The second main takeaway that I took from the class was that, and this is with all due respect to Justin Bieber and Miley Cyrus, that if you're under the age of 30, you probably shouldn't be writing autobiographies, right? And there's a reason, but there's a reason for it, and it's not the whole "you haven't lived long enough" argument, because actually I don't buy that argument. I really don't. The argument that I do understand, though, is that all of us have to understand that our lives are lived in a sense of context. And one thing that I firmly believe is that you cannot understand my life without understanding Wes's. And you can't understand Wes's without understanding mine. Both of those two stories individually, I think, don't have enough to stand on. People have asked us, like, had you never met Wes, would you have written a story? And I say, quite honestly, no. Because I don't think my life was that interesting. I don't think on its own. I mean, I feel like, the story of the kid who gets in trouble, gets some second chances, gets a lot of people who believes in him, changes the azimuth of his life, and goes off in a different direction. I feel like, I've read that book, I've seen that movie, I've listened to that song before, right? And the story of the kid who gets in trouble and gets involved in drugs and ends up dropping out of school and now is in prison for life, I've read that book and I've seen that movie and I've listened to that song before too. The reason that I thought that you had to add a sense of perspective and context to this story is because you cannot understand one without understanding the other. It's important for people to understand how thin that line really is between our life and someone else's life. And one of the reasons why I'm so excited to be here, I even think about the motto of this school, about this sense of service. The larger question has to be asked, who will you fight for? Who will you be a champion for? Who will you devote your time and your life and your energy to protect? Because they earned it. And they deserve it. I'm going to be completely and totally honest with you right now. And well, first let me couch it. You have to do well in school. Okay? Get good grades. Do well in your classes. All of you graduate at the top of your class. All right? Now that that has been said, if you walk across the graduation stage when you're ready to leave Taft and the only thing you have to show for it is a diploma, then you've missed the whole point. If you walk across the graduation stage, whenever it is, whether it's the end of this year or whether it's the end of 4 years, and the only thing you have to show for it is a transcript, then you miss the whole point of being here. If the whole pursuit of higher education was simply about the regurgitation of knowledge, then there's some books I can show you, right? There's some online courses you can take. That's not the point. The point of education, the point of higher education, is giving yourself not just the confidence, but the foundation for understanding what is going to make you a global citizen. What is going to give you that edge? What is going to give you that passion, that drive, in order to do something that isn't just temporary? We graduated from college 12 years ago, and I'm going to be very honest with you. No one ever asks me anymore, so Wes, what was your major? No one ever asks me anymore, Wes, how did you do in that class? Or Wes, remember that test we took on April 13th of 2001? How'd you do on that test? Nobody cares. It all fades. Now again, you've got to do well in school. All right, don't go back telling nobody that Westmore said we ain't got to study. I'm not trying to get in trouble. You got to do well in school, right? Because and here's the truth too. The better you do in school, the faster those questions fade. The worse you do, it's amazing how stubborn those questions are. All right? But the truth is, that is not what's going to be the mark of success. Those questions will fade. The questions that will never fade are when people ask you, what contribution have you made to humanity? That's the preparation. That's the battlefield that you're prepping for right now. And when it comes down to who you'll fight for and who you'll believe in, I would argue that the people who you will have to fight for, the people who you will have to understand, might not necessarily be people who oftentimes are thought about. And in many cases, they'll be the people that society often forgets about. When and Carl knows this, when I was going through the process of doing this book, one thing I didn't understand about the publishing business is that everything you see on the inside of a book, all the words and all the structures and all that kind of stuff, that's what the author wants to share. That's what the author wants to share with the world. That's what the author wants to share with the audience. Everything you see on the outside of a book, the title, the cover, the author photos and the blurbs and all that kind of stuff, all that stuff, that's what the publisher wants to share with the world. And the publisher is very deliberate about it because they know that when you walk into a bookstore, that they have got 3.2 seconds to capture your attention before you simply keep on walking and you will move on to the next book. So they will do whatever it takes in the cover and the title of a book to make sure that it's interesting enough that you will at least pick it up and maybe you'll even go buy it, because that's their business model. So when they're talking to authors about what the title of a book should be or what the cover of a book should be, they want the author to be happy, but to be completely bluntly honest, they kind of don't care, right? Because they're going to do what they need to do in order to sell more books. So when they call me in to have this conversation to ask me, it was really more ceremonial. They called me in and they asked me, they said, Wes, what do you think that the title of your book should be? And again, I didn't know this. So when they asked me, I was like, I'm glad y'all asked me. Because I have like 6 titles that I really like. And I started rattling off titles. I was like, what about Baltimore Suns? Or what about All the Difference? Or what about Out of Many? Or what about End of the Innocence? Or what about, and I started rattling all these titles off. And then I looked at them and I basically said, so y'all can go ahead and choose between those 6 because I'm good with any of them. And they looked at me, they're like, that's very kind of you. They said, but we think we have a better idea. And they said to me, they said, what do you think about The Other Wes Moore? And I looked at him and I said, that might be the dumbest book title that I've ever heard in my life. True. And they said, well, what don't you like about it? And I was like, actually, there's a whole bunch of stuff I don't like about it, but let me go ahead and start with 3. All right? First thing I told them I didn't like about it was I tried to make it very clear that this story is about much more than just these 2 kids. It's about much more than just the superficial. It's about much more than just, oh, cool, 2 guys, 1 name. But I wanted people to understand that it really is about our larger conversation, that this was a much larger call to action. This was not an autobiography or a biography, but it was a social commentary. And by putting the name inside of the title of the book, are you not completely negating that entire fact, right? Second thing I told them I like about it. What self-respected author do you know that puts their own name inside of a title of a book that they've written, right? No one's ever heard of the other J.K. Rowling or the other Stephen King or the other, you know what I'm saying? It sounds crazy. And the third thing I told them I didn't like about it, I was like, listen, no one knows who one Wes Moore is. So why does anybody care who the other Wes Moore is? Right? So I said this to them and they smiled. This is true. So I said this to them and they smiled and they said, those are actually all pretty good points. They said, the problem is that you're missing the point. Because you're absolutely right. It's not about you. And it's not about him. The name is completely irrelevant. You can throw any name inside of that book title because the fact is there are Wes Moores that exist in every one of our communities and in every one of our schools and in every one of our homes. Kids who are literally one decision away from going in one direction or going in a completely different direction. Kids who every day are straddling this line of greatness. And the problem is that they don't even know it. The name is irrelevant. The most important thing about the title is the other. The fact that our society is full of others. People who might not look like us, people who might not speak like us, people who might live in the other part of town, people who might not necessarily be students at Taft. Whose destiny matters as much to our long-term safety and security and greatness as ours does. The others. One thing I try to do with this story is, both Wes and I are very easy to caricature. It's very easy to look at, kind of the conclusions or look at the bios or look at whatever and come up with very quick and rash and in many cases incorrect conclusions as to who we are and how we got there. Very easy for both of us. What I wanted to do and what I was hoping that people would do is take a minute and take a beat and actually be prepared to peel the onion back a little bit. To understand sometimes life is a bit more complicated than we give it credit for. and to understand that sometimes the people that we see, who we can make quick and rash judgments about, are a bit more complicated than we give them credit for. In no way, shape, or form have I ever or will I ever make excuses for Wes's actions. But I also know that he's not as simple as some people might think. This was a process that, and again, and when I say we, I really mean we, because I know I'm just as guilty of it. I'm just as guilty as sometimes seeing people and making up assumptions as to how they got there and whatever like that. But it was a process that I was really forced to go through. When I got a chance to meet a person who later on became my friend, who I first learned about through wanted posters. Because when we're seniors in college, and the Baltimore Sun writes this article about this local kid who just got this Rhodes Scholarship and now how he's heading off to England with these 31 other American students. They sent us a whole bunch of stuff in the mail. They sent us plane tickets. They sent us tourist guides. One thing they didn't send us was a bill, so I was cool with that. And they talk a little bit about the story, a little bit about what the Rhodes Scholarship is, and they talk a little bit about my background. They talk about the fact that I only have 2 memories of my father, and the second one was when I was about 4 years old when I watched him die. They talk about the fact that as difficult as I thought I had it, because my father's my hero, and as difficult as I thought I had it or that my sisters had it, the person who really had it toughest was my mom. Because now here she was, immediately, instantaneously, and completely unexpectedly, a widow with 3 children that she was going to raise on her own. And in no way was this the life that she had prepared for or the life that she had expected. We talked about how we moved up from Maryland, moved up to New York to go live with my grandparents. I know there's a couple folks from the Bronx here too. They're okay, uptown, stand up. How we moved up to New York, how we moved up to the Bronx, lived with my grandparents. My grandfather was a minister. My grandmother was a school teacher for 27 years in the South Bronx. And how their house was barely big enough for them, but how they figured out a way to make it big enough for all of us. And almost immediately as I moved up, I found myself getting lost. Trying to search for this definition of manhood from a whole bunch of people who quite honestly had no business teaching me anything. How I spent all my time hurting people that genuinely love me so I could impress people that could care less about me. Picking and choosing which days were worthwhile to go to school. How my mother then even started finding different schools for me. How she even sent me across town to this school called Riverdale in the Bronx. And how she did it because she thought it'd be the best thing for me. And how that was the place that I most found myself getting even more lost. Because as I entered Riverdale and I'm started going through the classrooms at Riverdale and I'm hanging out with the students at Riverdale, I quickly found myself trying to be this chameleon, trying to fit in with everybody. So I very quickly became too poor for the kids at my school, but then too rich for the kids in my neighborhood. In this constant search to try to gain acceptance, the person who I most quickly lost was myself. And eventually my grades kept following in that direction, started getting in trouble. How the first time that I felt handcuffs on my wrist when I was 11 years old. And how when I was 13 years old, I found out that when my mother makes threats, that I should probably take her seriously. Because that's when she decided to send me away to another place, a military school in Pennsylvania called Valley Forge Military Academy. And how I hated every minute of this place when I first showed up. Literally, anyone who would listen to me, I would try to tell them I'm not staying here. I don't know why you're trying to teach me how to march when I can walk perfectly fine. I don't know why you're yelling at me. I'm standing right here and I have great hearing. I can hear you great. There's no point in you yelling. And now literally in the first 4 days, I had already run away 5 times from that school. Every time they would turn their back, I would just run because they would always tell us, they're like, there's a train station out in Wayne, and if you all don't like it here, you can just go home. And I would then just take them up on their offer. And until the last time, they actually drew me a map because it was so pathetic that I kept on getting lost. That just took me to the middle of the woods, and I ended up crying and sitting down and being scared. Then I heard a lot of leaves rustling, and I thought it was just wild animals, and then I turned around, and it was them. But they brought me back to campus, and we're in the middle of police system. We weren't on any outside communication. And they said, if we don't make an exception, we're going to lose them. So they said, Moore, you've got 5 minutes to make a phone call. Call whoever you want, but you've got 5 minutes. And I called the only number that I knew, which was my mom. And mom wasn't expecting to hear from me for about 8 weeks. And now here it is on day 4 at 1 o'clock in the morning. She gets a phone call. So she's freaking out. And I'm like, Mommy, I'm okay. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity, but I'm really ready to come home. Come get me tomorrow morning. Do you need directions? I'll go to school more often. I start going through this whole litany of things that she needs to do to make my life easier. And then she stops me. And she says, too many people have sacrificed in order for you to be there. And too many people are rooting for you. And you have got to understand it's not all about you. It's not all about you. And I listened to her talk, and after 5 minutes, they told me time is up, and they sent me back up to my room, and I gave them back the phone, and they hung up. And I'd be lying if I said anything changed that night, because it didn't. Because I went to bed that night just as angry as I went to bed the night before. Trust me. And I woke up the next morning even angrier. And that place still did not make any sense to me for a while. But eventually I began to understand what she was talking about the fact that the only way that I was going to make it was if my friends were there to push me. And the only way that they were going to make it was if I was there to push them. That this system was not built for you to make it on your own. And by the end of the first year, I was doing better academically, and I could play sports because I wasn't on probation anymore. And for the first time, when people asked my mom, how's Wes doing? She could say he's doing okay and not be lying. And that actually meant something. We moved back down to Maryland. My mother said I had a chance to go back to school in Baltimore if I wanted to, and actually I said if it's okay, I'd like to sit tight. I ended up finishing high school, joining the Army right out of high school, went off to community college. After community college, I transferred to Johns Hopkins, and while I was a senior at Johns Hopkins was when the Baltimore Sun was writing this article about this local kid who just received this scholarship. And at the same time, the Baltimore Sun was writing a whole series of articles on these 4 guys that one day walked into a jewelry store. How the first 2 guys walked in the jewelry store, and when they walked in the store, they reached in their coats and they pulled out guns. They cocked the guns back, and they started pointing the guns at everybody inside the store and telling everybody to get on the ground and keep your hands on top of your heads. And everybody who was inside the store got on the ground and put their hands on top of their heads like they were told to. About 10 seconds later, 2 other guys walked in the store, and when they walked in, they reached in the store, and they reached in their coats, and they pulled out mallets. One guy with a gun and one guy with a mallet went to the left, while one guy with a gun and one guy with a mallet went to the right. The ones with the guns were keeping everybody on the ground, while the ones with the mallets were walking around and smashing out jewelry cases and taking out watches and rings and necklaces. While everybody who was inside the store just kept their heads down and they listened as the glass kept on smashing around them. They met in the back of the store with about $400,000 worth of jewelry. One of them yelled, "Let's go," and then all 4 then ran out of the center of the store and ran outside to the adjacent parking lot. And one of the people who was inside the store that day was an off-duty police officer who was moonlighting as a security guard. He was a 13-year veteran of the Baltimore Police Force. He was a 3-time recipient of Police Officer of the Year. He was a father of 5 who just had triplets. And the reason he was working that day was because it was his day off from the police force, and he took on a second job to make extra money for his family. And he got up off the ground, and he drew his weapon, and he ran outside to see if he could stop the guys from getting away. And when he ran outside, he started kneeling next to cars and vehicles to give himself cover. But he didn't realize that one of the cars that he was kneeling next to was one of the cars that the guys were in. And they rolled the window down, and they shot him 3 times at point-blank range. And there was a 12-day national manhunt for the murder of Sergeant Prothero. And finally, after 12 days, all 4 guys were caught. One of the people that they eventually were looking for, that was captured and tried and convicted and sentenced for the crime, was a guy whose name was also Wes Moore. And I knew that there were questions I wanted to ask, and I knew Wes was the only one that could answer them. So one day I just decided to write him a note. I had no idea if he'd write back. And literally the first note that I wrote Wes was like, hey Wes, my name is Wes. Here's how I heard about you. And then I had all these questions I asked him. And a month later, I get a letter back from Jessup Correctional Institution from Wes Moore. And to be totally honest, it'd be one thing if the letter I would have gotten back from Wes, if I would have looked at that letter and opened up the envelope and pulled out the letter, and if the letter was like it was written in crayon or magic marker, like he wrote it with his whole hand, and instead of using, words, he used pictures. If that's a letter I would have gotten back from Wes, I would have looked at that letter and I would have said to myself, you know what, this actually makes sense. And that probably would have been it. The problem is I've never received that letter. The problem is the letter I did receive from Wes was one of the most interesting and articulate letters that I've ever received in my life. And it only led to more questions. And that one letter turned into dozens of letters. Those dozens of letters turned into dozens of visits. And now I've known Wes for close to a decade. And when people say, sometimes, people say, well, what was the difference? What was the one thing? If I'd had a woman came up to me, she's like, I want to let you know I didn't like your book. And I was like, that's cool. I was like, no, because it is. I mean, it's fine because, again, I wrote it because I wanted people to debate it and discuss it, not necessarily because I was looking for pats on the back. And so when I asked her, I was like, but if you don't mind me asking, why didn't you like it? She's like, because I feel like you tell us all about these boys and you bring us into their lives. And then when it's time for you to say, so what was the one thing that made the difference? You don't give an answer. And I said, well, to be totally honest, because there is no one answer. Raising kids is amazingly complicated. And when you happen to raise kids in some of the most dangerous and precarious communities of our country, it's that much more complicated. Anyone who believes that every child, no matter where you are born, and no matter what circumstances you are born into, that everyone is born with the same amount of assets, there are some neighborhoods that I would love to take you to. And here you make that same argument. I'm a firm believer that potential in this country is universal. Opportunity is not. And that difference between potential and where we all end up is where we all come in. That's where we collectively either decide to pay attention or we collectively decide to be apathetic. And so there is no one thing that this is. But I do know there are a couple things that do fundamentally matter. And ironically, every single one of them pertain to you. One thing that I know that matters is education matters. And this is about much more than just the two boys. Take away from the fact that here's one boy who went on and finished high school and college, etc. And then here's another boy who didn't make it past 10th grade. Take it back a generation and take it back to the mothers. Wes's mother was the first one in her family to go to college. She graduated from Baltimore City Community College with honors and then gets accepted to Johns Hopkins University. She's a student at Johns Hopkins, does 2 semesters at Johns Hopkins University, and one day she receives a letter indicating that her grants were cut. And she knew that she could no longer afford to go to school. I can't help but think how different her life could have been had she had the chance to finish college. Because education is about much more than simply a piece of paper. It's about much more than simply a diploma. It's about much more about the fact that you get to change the first line in your resume. It's about the fact that as you move up in education, your networks will change, your friendships will change, and your connections will change. I know if you did a quick straw poll of the adults in this room and asked them right now, I'd be the very first one to raise my hand. If you ask people about the job they have now or a job you had in recent history, if you did not get that job through the classified ads or through Monster.com. Because that's not the way this game works. 70% of jobs in this country do not happen that way. 70% of jobs in this country happen because one day you're going to get a phone call or an email from somebody who says, we have a mutual friend and I was looking for someone who can do X, Y, or Z and they recommended that I talk to you. or you're going to call up a friend or a mentor or a professor or a teacher or the parent of a friend, and you're going to say, I'm really interested in this field. Do you know anybody that does it? And they're going to say, I know 3 people that do that. I'll put you guys in touch. This is not the story of good mom versus bad mom. I would argue that my mother cared about us not a drop more than Wes's mother cares about her children. Wes's mother bleeds for her children. Wes's mother tried moving. Wes's mother tried different jobs. Wes's mother tried changing schools. It's not that Wes's mother didn't care. It's that in many cases, Wes's mother didn't know. And another thing that I know that does fundamentally matter are expectations do matter. Just like when I was talking with Wes about Baltimore, and I asked him, I said, so do you think that we're products of our environment? And he looks back at me and he says to me, actually, I think we're products of our expectations. And I thought to myself, he is absolutely right. That we're not products of our environments, we're products of our expectations. I know people who were literally born in the gutter, who have done amazing things with their life. And I know people who were born with every advantage known to man who have done absolutely nothing. Expectations matter because the expectations that other people have of us eventually become the expectations that we have of ourselves. And how we think, how we fight, how we believe has a funny way of coming to fruition with both us and others. I am so inspired to be here because you all have the chance to not just make a tremendous difference in your own lives, but a tremendous difference in the lives of so many others who will come behind you in these seats, and quite honestly, so many others who you might not have even met before. The chance to be a part of something bigger than just yourselves. The chance to make your impact felt in ways that you could not even have imagined your impact being felt. That's legacy. One thing that I always talked about, and when I talk about in the book, is how, the thing that changed for me wasn't the fact that I was physically transported. The moves from Baltimore to the Bronx to Valley Forge didn't change my way of thinking. What changed was that I truly found myself surrounded by people. People who helped me understand that the world was much bigger than what was directly in front of me. People who helped me understand that the world is a bigger place and that I actually had a place in it. People who helped me to understand that there wasn't a single accident of birth, not being black, not being poor, not being from Baltimore or the Bronx or fatherless, that was ever going to define me or that was ever going to limit me. And so in essence, what they did was they taught me what it meant to be free. That's the opportunity that every one of you have, is not just to taste your own freedom, but to make sure as many other people can taste theirs too. Because the truth is, that's what constitutes a great society. That's what constitutes a great community, is a place where everybody feels they have a vested interest in the success of everybody else. And everyone is willing to fight for their own. And they feel that there's a reason to. I'll close briefly with what Colonel Murphy, was my commandant of cadets in military school, told us. And this dude, he was as tough as nails. I think I talked about him briefly in the book, but he was a 3-time Vietnam veteran. My plebe brothers and I used to laugh, say I think we saw him smile once. And I think it was an accident when we saw him smile. But he was fair, and we loved him for it. But he was losing weight really quickly, and we found out he was diagnosed with cancer, and he had to leave the school. And he gave a farewell address to us, and we were all sitting in the pews, and he was standing up in the pulpit. And he said something to us that day that I will never forget. He looked down and he said, when it's time for you to leave here, whether it's time for you to leave this school, whether it's time for you to leave your job, whether it's time for you to leave your community, or when it's time for you to leave this planet, make sure that it mattered that you were ever even here. Make sure that it mattered that you were ever even here. We're not promised anything. No one has ever tapped me on the shoulder and said, you know what, Wes, you've got 4,622 more days left so you can pace yourself. And nobody ever will. We have no idea. The only thing that we do know is every day is a new opportunity to make it matter that we were ever even here. And the only other question that we then have to answer is, did we make the best of it? I'm incredibly thankful to be here. I'm incredibly thankful for the invitation and incredibly thankful for your service. God bless you guys and thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you. You guys are awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Y'all are so sweet. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you. I'm not sure how exactly I want to. Oh yeah. Yeah, whatever works. Absolutely.